Hello and welcome to the third session of the GCF Private Investment for Climate Conference entitled Navigating the Energy Transition, Maintaining and Accelerating Momentum in a Post-COVID-19 Environment. My name is Rajiv Mahajan. I'm the Project Finance Manager at the Green Climate Fund, and I have the pleasure to moderate this interesting discussion. For the benefit of those who are joining us through VOVA, for the first time, I will remind you of a few housekeeping items. Simultaneous interpretation is available in Spanish and French. We also have automated captioning available in several languages. Please see relevant instructions in the session description on VOVA. As well, we would call upon the audience members to share questions to our panelists through the Q&A tab in VOVA. We will be monitoring the questions submitted in writing and will share with the panelists later during the Q&A session. If time permits, if you will be tweeting or sharing over social media, we will encourage you to use the hashtag GPIC 2020 and to tag GCF in your posts. We are active on all social media platforms. Lastly, to be respectful of everyone's time, I would request support from our 6 distinguished speakers to keep to our tightly packed agenda. I will now proceed with the session. Clean physical infrastructure investment in the form of renewable energy assets, energy efficiency improvements, and e-mobility are core to the low carbon transition that is envisioned under the Paris Agreement. While energy sectors in developing countries are at a critical juncture of pushing for positive reforms and overdue structural changes, the process of building a low carbon and climate resilient energy future remains often way too complex and deadly. The COVID-19 crisis emerged at a time when climate and energy investments were experiencing an increased momentum. Its lingering effects could also take the wind out of the sails of private sector energy transition investments in developing countries. In light of heightened risk aversion
and capital scarcity induced by COVID-19 as well as persistently low fossil fuel prices, catalytic funding for energy-focused investments will be more important than ever. Against this backdrop, today's session aims to explore how innovative blended finance solutions can help in unlocking the current impasse and increase investments to maintain and potentially accelerate the energy transition momentum in a post-COVID-19 environment. Now I have the distinct honor of
introducing the panelists of this session. First, I'd like to welcome Dr. Kevin Kanina Kariuki, who joined the African Development Bank in April this year as the Vice President of Energy, Climate and Green Growth. Dr. Kariuki brings along with him 30 years of experience in the power sector and now will oversee AFDB's efforts towards universal energy access and advancement of climate resilient and low carbon development trajectories in Africa. Since Kevin has to leave halfway through the session, Mr. Wale Shonibare will represent the African Development Bank for the remainder of the session. Wale is currently serving as the Director, Energy Financial Solutions, Policy and Regulation with the African Development Bank. He brings with him over 3 decades of experience in debt and equity capital markets, M&A, project finance, spanning across Asia, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I'd also like to introduce Mr. Manoj Kohli, who is currently serving as the country head of SoftBank India, where he supports a portfolio of over 20 companies of the SoftBank Group and the SoftBank Vision Fund, such as Ola, Paytm, and WeWork. Overall, his 41 years of work experience is divided between manufacturing, telecom, and renewable sectors globally. I'd next like to welcome Dr. Megumi Muto, who's the Deputy Director of the Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development at the Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA. Dr. Muto has extensively written in the area of impact evaluation and brings along a rich experience in climate change impacts on the Asian coastal megacities, as well as in industrial clusters in Africa. Next, I'd like to welcome Gavin Templeton, who is the head of sustainable finance at the Macquarie-owned Green Investment Group, formerly known as the UK Green Investment Bank, Having worked in the financial and commodity markets for over 25 years, Gavin is advising governments globally on how to transition to a low carbon economy while supporting Macquarie's CEO in the wider global green investment movement. Last but not the least, I'd like to welcome Mr. Richard Parry, who is a founding partner of Electra, a leading infrastructure project developer in sub-Saharan Africa. Richard brings over 30 years of experience in development, structuring, and financing of infrastructure assets in emerging markets, particularly in the renewable energy space in Africa. Now, my first question goes to Kevin. As a key partner of the GCF in Africa, our shared commitment to ambitious climate action is critical to catalyze public-private partnerships in the continent's fight against COVID-19. What is AFDB doing to support private sector investments in the clean energy space during these difficult times? What are AFDB's priorities over the next 1 year? Kevin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rajiv. Very quickly. First of all, the bank is indeed proudly a key partner with the Green Climate Fund for mobilizing funds for Africa. The partnership is almost a natural one, as both aim to mobilize additional financing for the continent, which is home to 27 out of 33 most extreme climate change vulnerable countries in the world. Yet, it only receives about 3 to 4% of global climate finance. It is in this context that the bank has had to demonstrate leadership, growing its climate finance from 9% in 2016 to 36% in 2019, and we are on target to allocate 40% of our own financing as climate finance, but for repurposing of utilization of funds necessitated by the COVID-19 pandemic. I think at a macro level, the impacts of COVID-19 have been manifestly evident, leading to hitherto unimaginable economic slowdown. This is the reason that the bank timeously established a $10 billion COVID-19 response facility to help our countries mitigate the impact of the pandemic on the economies, including facilitating access to health services and basic needs, and to provide humanitarian assistance to highly vulnerable people. From a power sector perspective, just to cite two impacts, the economic slowdown due to various levels of lockdowns resulted in 15 to 25% reduction in electricity demand, while many consumers rendered jobless by close of businesses and companies were unable to pay their electricity consumption, thereby severely constraining cash flows and financial performance of power utilities. The pandemic has also affected the energy projects that are under development due to supply chain disruptions, workers being unable to work, and either extensive delays at borders or indeed border closures altogether, leading to slowdown of projects, some of which were scheduled for commissioning in 2020. It is cognizant of these impacts that the bank proactively designed interventions that supported electricity sector as part of what I mentioned earlier, the COVID-19 response facility. The aim being to safeguard the financial viability of the power sectors. Measures included support for utilities to enable them to defer payments and or reduce electricity bills for SMEs, small medium enterprises, and vulnerable households. Countries that benefited from this in this regard were Mozambique, Cameroon, Gabon, and Cote d'Ivoire. From my personal perspective, I think the most outstanding example of the potential impact of what we did is exemplified by Egypt's electricity and green growth support program, whose financing, including the bank's 225 million euro. The project anchor is anchored on the twin objectives of, firstly, enhancing financial sustainability and governance of the electricity sector, and secondly, promoting clean energy and energy efficiency for fostering green growth, with a view to increasing to 20% renewable energies contribution in the country's energy mix by 2020. This actualizes the bank's support for the Build Back Better and Greener post-COVID-19 future. Additionally, we've also initiated some very interesting projects for transition to low carbon development pathways, including the SEVA COVID-19 off-grid recovery platform, which aims to support energy access businesses through the crisis, ensuring the continuation of essential energy services and sustaining jobs. Secondly, there is a 3-year Safer Energy for Healthcare program, which we have also instituted, which focuses on increasing sustainable energy access to healthcare facilities in countries vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic. I think I'll leave that for now here.
Thank you, Kevin. My next question is for Manoj. India's NDCs, as per the Paris Agreement, foresee that 30% of vehicles in India to be electric by 2030. That's barely 10 years from now. To achieve this ambitious goal, the government of India has put in place several policy initiatives. While this is good progress from the intent perspective, there are several constraints. For instance, limited availability of charging infrastructure, high upfront costs, access to capital, supply chain constraints that need to be addressed to ensure sustainable holistic growth. How do you see the industry's role evolving in this process, and which market segments represent, or rather present, the most promising opportunities?
Thank you, Rajiv, for inviting me. We are going through a wonderful global transformation, and India is in the forefront of the new energy revolution. India has to leapfrog because on technology, plus new business models and infrastructure, as you rightly said, we need to scale up very, very rapidly. US, Germany, Japan, and few other countries are early movers. India has been adapting very fast. We may not be early movers like those countries, but I think we are adapting very fast. And our strategy, our innovation strategy is coming in place, our lessons learned are coming in place. And the key is that we need affordability for our consumers. Because India, as you know, is not a rich country, 1.35 billion people. We need affordability as well as returns coming from all investments. So whatever business models are being proven in other parts of the world, we are checking out, validating, and seeing which are applicable to Indian situation. Hardware, manufacturing government is really focusing. We have a program called Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is focusing only on manufacturing, building deep supply chains in every sector of India. Also on software, we are really moving faster because we really supply software across the world. So our engineers are doing that very well. Luckily, public and private sector both are coming together in planning this jointly for charging infrastructure, for EV manufacture, as well as supply chain. Companies such as Ola, Uber, Sun Mobility, Tata's, Mahindra are all creating e-mobility infrastructure either together with government or singularly. I believe that multinationals, large multinationals will play a very important role to integrate these three revolutions. Now, in this situation, they are integrating revolutions of e-mobility, energy, renewable energy, as well as IT through AI induction. So it's a fantastic situation which is being created here. And in terms of segments which you asked, two-wheeler and three-wheeler segments, as you know, are mass markets of India. And they carry maybe 80% or 85% of India's mass market. So I think the focus of e-mobility is on these two sectors, along with buses, because this carries 80-85% of India. cars comparatively come lower in the priority. So India is focusing on that, and I believe that we'll definitely meet, if not beat, the 2030 target which we have taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. Turning to Gavin, representing the world's largest infrastructure asset manager, could you reflect a bit on Macquarie's journey in the sustainable infrastructure space so far, while touching upon your efforts to support developing countries maintain energy transition momentum in the midst of COVID-19?
Thanks very much, Rajiv, and thanks to the GCF. First of all, it's good to see Rajiv. I usually see him in person at this time of year, but unfortunately it's virtually today. But thanks to the GCF and colleagues for the invitation to speak today, and greetings from a sunny Edinburgh in Scotland. So as was mentioned, Green Investment Group is part of Macquarie. So talking about Macquarie, Macquarie's invested over $45 billion into renewables since 2010. And we currently have a pipeline across the whole organization of some 46 gigawatts. And as was mentioned, we're actually the #1 infrastructure asset manager globally, as well as being the #1 global renewable energy advisor. And I guess, reflecting on the journey that I personally have had, as was mentioned, I was formerly part of the UK Green Investment Bank, which was acquired by Macquarie in 2017 to become the Green Investment Group. And we are the principal investment platform for green infrastructure. And just in a microcosm in terms of that growth, we've gone from something like 120 to over 400 people in the last 3 years. We've gone from investing in one country to investing in over 25 countries. And it continues apace. I mean, I think it would be a fair reflection to say that green infrastructure is the only sector where we are active that has not slowed down due to COVID. It has accelerated. That is because there's a huge amount of interest globally in that. And how do we think about that as an institutional investor? I think we cut it in 4 different lenses. The first of those around climate resilience. And I'll maybe talk a little bit about our work in that later on. But we are active in areas like agriculture as a group, improving carbon intensity in farming in Brazil, as well as Australia. We're also helping clients decarbonize. So the clients we have are global, of course. They're operating in many, many emerging market countries. And that can take different forms as well. An area of our business which is growing at a very rapid pace is corporate PPAs. So corporates who wish to buy renewable energy because it's more reliable than the sources they can get, and it's also cheaper. Again, this is an economic situation that we're in. People are not doing it to look good. They're doing it because it's cheaper, and they're wanting to do that globally. So this is not just your large tech firms. This is corporations across food and beverage, across clothing, across the tech sector who want to buy renewable energy for their global operations. And we are obviously helping to support that. And then there's our bread and butter, developing and managing projects. And, we're doing that in 2 different ways. And I think it's quite interesting in reflections on the fact that, there's not enough projects out there. We're of a view that one of the issues is not enough good project developers. So we are buying project developers. We're working with project developers. We are joint venturing with project developers where we find them in order to provide them with capital to do their job. So a good example of that, we bought a company called Blue Leaf Energy, which operates in the commercial industrial space across Southeast Asia. They have got a long heritage in that area. Again, we don't have that, so we want to work with them to grow the investment opportunities there. And also we're working in partnership from an investment perspective, mentioning that the UK climate investment. So this is a joint venture that we have with the government of the UK, which invests in sub-Saharan Africa and India. And that has obviously driven us to seek accreditation at the Green Climate Fund. I'm pleased to say that the accreditation master agreement was signed, I think, only last week. So that was a small journey that we were on. But again, we're delighted to be part of the GCF family, because I think that partnership model is what we must try and develop more, working between public and private sectors in order to accelerate the transition in emerging markets. And again, I can speak a little bit more about some of the partnerships that we're working in a little bit later. Thanks, Rajiv.
Thank you, Kevin. And indeed, it's a big milestone that we've achieved this week. So now we look forward to projects coming from your shop. Muto-san, JICA has quite a rich experience in supporting conventional large infrastructure projects in the energy as well as the transportation sector across developing countries using blended finance. What has been JICA's approach while applying principles of blended finance to support new technologies and projects in the clean energy value chain?
Okay, thank you very much, Rajiv, and thank you for the opportunity for me to join this very interesting panel. JICA is the development agency of the Japanese government, and we do technical assistance and development finance, both sovereign and private. When we talk about blended finance, discussions tend to concentrate on project finance structures where both public and private finance take part. Our private sector window have been involved in PF structures such as Atsetse wind farm in Mongolia, together with SoftBank and the EBRD. And across Asia, we are teaming up with ADB under LEAP, which is leading Asia's private infrastructure fund. And one of our most recent transactions done under that is solar in Vietnam. Having said that, I'm not a hands-on project finance person, but from the experience that I have for technical assistance and sovereign finance, I think I may point out some broader categories of what to blend in blended finance. One potential area is technical assistance. Convergence rightly identified that technical assistance typically delivered through grant aid agencies could perform a catalytic effect. At the OECD, informal discussions are ongoing on how to identify these catalytic effects for mobilizing private finance. Examples may include energy master plans, preliminary feasibility studies, or training of market regulators. Some direct and some indirect effects. I have been involved in all of this while working for the Philippines when the government was designing possible pathways post-offshore gas. Another potential area is how to deal with the completion risk. I cannot say that JICA's sovereign finance is specifically intended that way, but there are some cases where conventional large infrastructure assets that we have financed through our straight sovereign finance has been privatized after the construction stage. One good case is the geothermal Tiwi Macban rehabilitation project in the Philippines. It started as a sovereign loan to National Power Corporation in '94 and completed in 2005, long time period. The feasibility study was conducted by JICA. And you can imagine that the risk was enormous due to the problem of steam supply. After the energy market reform in the late 90s, this geothermal asset was privatized. And I understand that now they are successfully issuing green bond with the ADB. Similar things have happened for telecom and water. Privatization of water in Metro Manila is hailed as a success story, but the bulk of the initial assets were there due to the concessional loans, including ADB, World Bank, and JICA. I happen to know the Philippines well, and I can tell you that in the 90s and 2000s, the budget situation was not as good as the present state. But large infrastructure projects, albeit slowly, we realized partly because long-term sovereign loans was taking the completion risk, which paved the way for future private sector participation. Mind you that I'm not telling that public sector design and implementation is the best. I'm not saying that. With all the delays and issues that we have encountered at financiers, but yes, we were taking the completion risk. I hope I could provide some broad thinking in how to practically pursue blending in an era where budget limitations are unprecedented and risk perceptions are worsening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muto-san, and that indeed touched a number of chords within the GCF, given that We too have been looking at facilitating regulation through technical assistance to get in private sector investments, and also de-risking the investments that the private sector would be making. And on that note, I would move on to Richard. As a project developer, you have a unique insight into the minds of governments, regulators, and financiers. While the governmental capacity and regulatory certainty have often been cited as significant challenges hindering the flow of private sector capital into these sectors, could you share your experiences of entering these countries? How has Electra managed the perceived risks? Could you share Electra's view on how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected your plans of investments? Richard, you seem to be on mute.
I think I was put on mute by one of your colleagues.
We can hear you now.
Rajiv, first of all, I think on a personal note, it has been a really great pleasure for Electra to work with you and your team over the last 6 months. We have been trying, I think, with your very able help from you and your team, to address the very problem that you have raised, and that is how to accelerate the investment in good bankable green projects in Africa. Electra has existed for almost 15 years now, and we have achieved quite a significant amount of success over the course of those 15 years in developing and closing projects. But I think highlight two particular factors which are very sensitive in whether a project can be brought to reality or not. And that basically is the ability to work within an environment of regulatory certainty, and also work in an environment where the counterparts you are dealing with within each country has good capacity to negotiate agreements and conclude them in a manner which are acceptable to international financiers, like some of the panelists who have spoken today. And the reality is that, particularly in terms of capacity, there are good people who work within ministries of energy, within the regulatory bodies in countries in Africa, but they are often overwhelmed and overworked. So the capacity does exist, but it is scarce. And so the net result of that is that developers such as ourselves are subject to very long delays in the development process. So we as developers have to have the resources available to be able to work with our counterparts in our client countries. But over an extended period, we have closed many projects in Africa, but some of these projects have taken 6, 8, even 9 or 10 years to take from initial idea through to full financial close. So for us, GCF's key, one of your key attributes is your ability to provide development capital which is patient, which can withstand the amount of weighting that is necessary to produce bankable deals. And so that is really why we have been so attracted to working with you on a couple of projects. One is a portfolio of renewable energy projects in Africa that Electra has under development. And secondly, a portfolio of lake transport projects where we see a lot of potential for GHG reduction in the movement of freight over large water bodies in Africa, particularly Lake Victoria, Lake Volta, and Lake Tanganyika. So for us, the secret sauce that you provide is one of patient capital for developers such as ourselves.
Thank you, Richard. And at this point, I'd invite Wale or Muto-san or Gavin or Manoj to reflect on the issue of perceived risks. How do you see those very quick reactions before we proceed into the second phase of the session?
Sorry, you want to comment on what particularly? On risks?
Perceived risks. Perceived risks versus actual risks.
Well, I would say that one of the things that we've put a lot of focus on is helping governments to build capacity, because it's very important that our governments are able to create a level playing field. For instance, the African Development Bank has something called the African Legal Support Facility. And this is how we help governments procure international advisors to negotiate with the private sector, because at times you find that the playing field is not balanced. And we want these deals to be sustainable. So you don't want a situation where there are certain perceptions that government hasn't signed a fair deal, and then a new government comes in and they may want to cancel that contract. These are some of the things that cause the private sector to overprice risk. But where a contract is properly balanced, then it's more likely to be sustainable and it's a win-win situation. So for us, we spend significant amounts of time trying to reduce risk by creating capacity on the government side to be able to negotiate. And this is the way in which you're going to build trust, ultimately.
Muto-san, Manoj, Gavin, any quick reactions on perceived risks?
Can I just say to Wale, I 100% agree. You can't get away from the risk of political risk, and cycles of governments as well. Again, that's one of the, in my role at the Green Investment Group advising governments globally, the capacity gap is a consistent problem, which we need to address, and we need to try and figure out the right channels to address that. And it's great to hear Wale and African Development Bank, focusing on that, because I think, again, if you can address that, there are a multitude of risks, of course, but if you can start to address that and build the capability for the government to be able to own the issues and give investors confidence, then that is a really, really important step to catalyzing more investment, I think.
Muto-san, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I also totally agree what our colleague said on the capacity building. And I would like to add that in the case of JICA, we do both technical assistance and finance. And in technical assistance, we do things together. It is not financier versus the one that receives the finance, but it is more like solving problems together. For example, when I was stationed in the Philippines, I went to the resettlement sites and listening to all the people, the communities, and that is something that needs to be done in order to really reduce the risks. And if you don't have the capacity, both from the countryside and the financing side, we cannot go through. Thank you very much.
Manoj, any quick reactions?
I think reskilling and upskilling is a very important area. And if the governments and the communities do not focus on that, do not invest in that, I think that will become definitely, today it's perceived risk, but tomorrow it will become real risk. So that I believe for millions of people is something where the transition has to focus on and keep some investments apart.
So that's an interesting point, and the real challenge is preventing the perceived risks from becoming a reality. And that's what is going to attract investments into that market. On that note, Mr. Kohli, you had been at the forefront of the telecom revolution in India way back in the mid 1990s, and subsequently you took that revolution to Africa as well. Telecom really took off after economies of scale in equipment and headset prices set in. Can the telecom success story be replicated in electric mobility? And what's your opinion on how the GCF as a risk-inclined impact investor could do more to democratize e-mobility?
Thank you, Rajiv. I think that's very, very exciting question for me because I spent more than 20 years in telecom building 400 million customers across 20 countries in Asia and Africa. And I believe this magic happened because of three reasons. Number one, affordability. I think the services were affordable by the masses. That's very, very important. Second, the scale. We built fantastic scale, hundreds and thousands of towers going into small towns, villages, etc., etc. And third is a very creative, very innovative and unique business model, which now the world is replicating, was important for us to do this. So these three things came together as a combo to do the magic in telecom. Now, coming back to what we are talking about, e-mobility, India with 1.35 billion population. On the renewable energy, we are starting well. We already have 90 gigawatt for solar, wind, hybrid. And the target is 175 by 22 and 450 gigawatt by 2030, which is the biggest plan in the world. However, the manufacturing side is still weak, and that is now being focused upon, and I'm sure in the next 2 years it will come up. On the e-mobility side, there are similar issues. Manufacturing of EVs, manufacturing of storage batteries especially, because storage battery is the heart of the system and 30 to 40% of the total cost. And that luckily is coming up. Government is coming up with very good incentive schemes for storage battery production manufacturing in India. So that's coming up well. So I believe that this scaling up will happen. Economies of scale will come and affordability will come because it takes time. In telecom also it took time. The magic didn't happen in 1 year. It takes a bit of time. And the same will apply to solar and e-mobility because the viable business models have to be shaped and achieved. Now coming to GCF, I feel that this sector needs a patient capital. It's not that you need a capital which will give a very fast return. It's not like that. And but GCF and similar funds across the world are already come to a conclusion that this is a tremendous opportunity of a transition which may be the biggest transition in the world, both the renewable energy transition as well as the mobility transition together is the biggest in the world concerning two sectors, biggest sectors of the world. So investments in, as I said, battery, investments in charging infrastructure, investment in wherever the charging infrastructure is there for swapping of batteries in the fuel stations, motors, onboard chargers, many areas. I think a tremendous opportunity of growth as well as new technology. So I believe that that magic of telecom will happen, but it'll take 4 to 5 years more for that to fructify. Thank you.
And that's quite a positive statement, and we really look forward to doing that. That will be the the ultimate culmination of two sectors coming together, renewable energy feeding into e-mobility, and that's what we are envisioning going forward as well. Wale, turning to the African Development Bank, could you share your institutional learnings from the renewable transition over the past 10 years? What would you do differently? And how do you see the role of the MDBs and DFIs evolving? How do you plan to replicate success stories from renewables in new segments such as low carbon transport or energy efficiency?
Yeah, thanks very much, Rajiv. Indeed, it's been quite a learning curve for everybody investing in the sector, including the African Development Bank. I mean, if I look at our own portfolio, we have roughly 14 billion UA, which is around $20 billion worth of investment in energy right now. And between 2001 and 2010, I'd say about just less than 10% of that portfolio was renewable energy. But fast forward between 2011 and 2019, you have close to 60% of that portfolio. And in 2017, 100% of the bank's approvals was renewable. So that transition is happening and it's speeding up. The bank has ambitions that by 2025, all our financing will qualify as climate finance. The current statistic from 2019 is about 36%. So we're all learning very fast. But one of the key things that is also worth looking at in terms of our own learning curve is that we started by investing a lot in generation. So again, between 2001 and 2010, about 65% of the investments was in generation and less so in distribution and interconnections and also reforms. But we see that you have to invest across the entire value chain. So we're investing more in utility reforms. So we're still investing in generation. The entire portfolio has increased in size, but generation is now roughly around 34% of the portfolio. But we have boosted investments in interconnections as well as reforms, because the utilities are the ones who are going to buy the electricity. And you have to strengthen those utilities. You'll find that this idea of a single buyer model has to be changed, because unfortunately, many of these utilities are not credit worthy. And so there's a limit to the number of guarantees you can get. Especially now in COVID times, you have debt sustainability issues. So we want to build those interconnections and allow regional trade. So we're putting a lot of effort into strengthening the power pool. And in terms of energy transition, you have to be able to anchor the renewable energy with solid baseload. So for Africa, gas will still have a role to play over a period of time, because you need to be able to strengthen the grids and anchor the renewables. But over time, as battery technology becomes cheaper, and we also have an initiative called the Green Baseload, which is using funding from one of our funds called Sustainable Energy for Africa to help governments transition from fossil fuel polluting baseload to greener baseload, whether it's hydro, whether it's geothermal. So we're doing that, but it's very important in Africa that we can build the pools. So in terms of what the African Development Bank is doing, we are investing across the entire value chain. We are building capacity, we're enabling reforms, and we are also funding new technologies that the maybe more commercially minded investors are still afraid to touch. So we've done the largest concentrated solar power plant in Africa, if not the world. In Morocco, everybody knows about the Ouarzazate project. And we've also been involved in Egypt, doing one of the largest solar parks, 2,000 megawatts. So we have come on quite a journey, and we're all still learning. But we feel that the bank is actually at the forefront of driving the energy transition in Africa.
And that's quite critical, Wale. Unless some of these enabling factors are are debottlenecked, financed, investments won't flow into the sectors we would like them to flow into. On this note, I would proceed on to Muto-san. While one cannot disagree that energy projects, apart from helping mitigate GHG emissions, have substantial adaptation co-benefits, how can one introduce elements of climate resilience to the new energy infrastructure that is being built?
Okay, thank you very much for this very important issue of climate resilience. For example, in the example of geothermal, Tiwi Magban, that I was discussing before, during the construction of that project, there has been frequent delays due to typhoons because the project is located in typhoon corridor. So that is one example. And I would like to touch upon the experience that I had after the Typhoon Yolanda in 2013 in the Philippines, the super typhoon. When I arrived at the site, I was shocked to see all the electricity distribution facilities falling down just like coconut trees because of the wind. And post Yolanda, I have been working with NEA, which is National Electricity Authority, and several electric cooperatives to how to incentivize the distribution companies to build back better the distribution lines. And we brought in our partner Development Bank of Japan, who has been working on what is called business continuity management credit rating, which is to rate companies based on the build back better degree and reflect to the pricing of insurance and the future loans. That discussion was brought to the Treasurer of the Philippines, and she pushed us to expand that scheme to other public assets. So this is just one way of bringing climate resilience into various arrays of infrastructure assets. Thank you.
Gavin, how do you see barriers to institutional capital in the climate space, and what factors would contribute to increasing your appetite to co-invest with us in non-OECD countries? What learnings could you apply from your experience of investing in OECD countries to emerging markets? And what could be done to unlock local and institutional capital and incentivize asset allocation to the clean energy or low carbon transport space?
Thanks, Rajiv. In terms of what has worked, one sector in one country has been a huge success, and I would point to offshore wind in the UK. We at the Green Investment Bank were actually set up, and one of our focus sectors was the offshore wind sector. And I guess I would break it down into three main factors, which would equally apply if you're investing in emerging markets as to why it was such a success. The first of those was political buy-in. There was cross-party support for it. There was no political risk at all because everyone agreed that this was the right thing to do. There was policy, the policy was predictable, understandable. Everybody understood what it was. Everybody understood what was coming from a policy perspective. There was no surprises there. And then there was capital as well. So in effect, the government was investing its own capital via the Green Investment Bank into this new sector. So you had three big factors around politics, policy, and capital, which were all pulling in the same direction. And the result of that was a power price which has dropped over 50% in 5 years. We have a supply chain. We have the largest offshore wind sector globally in the UK, and the prices continue to fall, day on day. So I think if anyone's looking for a good example of what works, that's certainly something to think about. In terms of how we are thinking about how we can increase the amount of investment going into emerging markets. This is something that we take very, very seriously. Our CEO, Shamara Wickramayake, has taken a seat on 2 global commissions. The first of those is the UN Global Commission on Adaptation. And the second of those is the Climate Finance Leadership Initiative, which was set up by Michael Bloomberg. And that's focused predominantly on mitigation. And what we have done as part of that conversation, we produced a report which was actually issued last year. So the Climate Finance Leadership Initiative has got Macquarie, it's got AXA, it's got Allianz, it's got Enel, HSBC, Goldman Sachs. So very, very, very large private sector investors getting around the table to say, how can we increase the amount of investment going into emerging markets? And that work has actually continued this year. We've now got a partnership with European development finance institutions. And recently the World Bank, by its Global Infrastructure Facility, has joined in. And we're going to be publishing some guidelines this November. So what we're calling investment readiness guidelines. And these guidelines are really an effort to put our minds together, both public and private, to say, if you want to increase the amount of private capital coming to your market, here are some of the things that you may want to consider. Of course, political risk, policy risk, all those things are included. They're going to be getting published as part of the Green Horizons Summit, which is happening, I think, around the 20th of November. And then on the Global Commission on Adaptation, where we are, Shamara is one of the commissioners, we are focusing where we can add value. So we are thinking or trying to add value by thinking about what it would take to introduce private capital into infrastructure whose sole purpose is to adapt to climate change. So for example, how do you privately fund a sea barrier? And we are going to be talking a little bit more about some of the projects that we're developing on that side in January at the Global Commission Summit. But just to give you an example, one project that we're working on is the combination of, it's a sea barrier with tidal turbines in it. So in effect, you get the adaptation measure, but you get green electrons being produced in order to create the revenue stream, in order to mobilize the private sector. Now this, when we're talking about it, doesn't seem too groundbreaking. And frankly, I'm glad it's not too groundbreaking, because we think these sorts of solutions are scalable, but they're only going to be possible by that partnership with the public sector and the private sector. That is going to be key to mobilizing private institutional investors into emerging markets. And again, that's why we see the GCF as such a key partner to be able to help that.
Thanks, Kevin. Richard, what innovative and transformative climate investment ideas does Electra aspire to put into action in Africa? What potential do you see in partnering with the GCF, and more precisely, how do you envision leveraging on our resources to unlock these transformative investments in clean energy and low carbon transport?
Thank you, Rajiv. As I noted earlier on in our panel discussion, we have been working to develop a pipeline of projects which we think offer some very interesting opportunities in reduction of GHGs in basic transport, where we are developing a number of projects which involve substituting road transport for water transport. Africa is an unusual continent in that it has several very large bodies of water that can be used for very direct forms of transport. For those of you who have lived and traveled in Africa, many will be familiar with the daily trials of being stuck behind very large diesel-powered trucks, which take a lot of fuel and expend a lot of effort, both in terms of maintenance of roads, but more importantly in generation of large amounts of carbon fumes. And our idea is to replace that with lake transport. And we already, within our portfolio as a company, have a couple of these businesses up and running. And what we are looking to join hands with GCF in developing a whole portfolio of these kinds of business. But like Wale said, we've got to get used to the idea of not necessarily relying on big governmental agencies to pay the bills of power producers. In the same way, these lake transport companies are going to be totally driven by demand, and therefore in power generation terms, they are projects without a PPA. And as a result, entities like GCF really offer a very valuable product for us, which is the ability to invest in relatively high risk, but manageable quantities of high risk to facilitate new interventions in reducing GHGs in Africa. So that is, I think, one of the exciting challenges that we are hoping to address with you guys over the next 6 months.
Thanks, Richard. As we have a few minutes left, I would now like to open the floor for questions and reflections from our audience on the remarks made by the panel. Many of you have already submitted your written questions through the Q&A tab on WOVA, and we invite all of you to continue to send your questions or comments throughout the rest of this session. The first question is, what are the ways to ensure fairness in the process of energy transition following the principle of no one being left behind? Perhaps any one of you could volunteer to answer that question.
Well, I can have a stab at it. Well, I mean, in terms of energy transition, I think what's very important is for us in Africa is the whole issue about energy access. And you'll find that we've had different rates of progress. So in North Africa, you have access rates at around 99%. It's pretty flat terrain. And so you can extend the grid to many of these communities, more remote communities. Whereas in a lot of other parts of Africa, it's much more difficult to extend the grid. So we're looking at distributed generation. And that's where the mini grids and solar home systems come in, where you have to go closer to those communities. And extending the grid is quite expensive. It probably costs an average about $1,000 per connection. Whereas with the distributed energy solutions, it's much lower than that. It's probably about 10% of that amount. So for that reason, we have been working with governments where you create situations that will give private sector the incentive to establish these mini grids. So for instance, of the Nigeria electrification project, there is what we call, it's a performance-based grants, where a mini grid developer goes up, sets up the mini grid, and after a year of consistent performance, they get part of their investment back. And we also have another scheme where it's more viability gap funding, because we know that these mini grids right now probably don't recover all of their costs just yet, but you provide that viability gap funding in order to to make those tariffs affordable for the local community. And that's absolutely critical. You know, the issues of willingness to pay and ability to pay, you know, so affordability and willingness to pay. So we have to carry the local communities along and make sure that these tariffs are set at a level where, you know, there's a willingness to pay and people can also afford to pay so that no one gets left behind.
Thank you, Wale. Gavin, yes.
Yeah, and I think it's vitally important. I mean, the just transition is extremely important, absolutely everywhere. One of the things that we're engaged on is, you know, understanding where existing expertise can be repurposed. You know, so a good example is what is happening in offshore wind in the UK, where the expertise that exists from oil and gas exploration, a lot of that is directly transferable into these new areas. And you can, you know, the government can support training to help people upskill and change direction into these new areas. A lot of companies are not waiting. We're seeing huge repurposing of that happening anywhere. But interestingly, you know, the skills that exist, also thinking about what comes in CCUS, so carbon capture and storage. You know, interestingly, Macquarie has made an investment into a carbon capture and storage project in Scotland. And we're very excited about that because, again, thinking about all those jobs which exist in oil and gas and being able to repurpose those to the just transition, the transition which is to come, you know, is really, really important. So that education piece and planning for how you know, help the jobs that exist repurpose into jobs for the future is going to be really, really important.
Thanks, Kevin. The next question is quite interesting, actually, from e-mobility perspective. So it goes as follows: without a price on carbon and with heavy fossil fuel subsidies in some countries, would e-mobility be ever able to compete with conventional vehicles? I think the floor is open. Whoever wants to take this on.
Absolutely, it will be. There is a gestation period which we have to patiently wait for. But I think the point we made that in the short to medium term, we have to push harder. Every country has to push harder. What we have seen in the last 12 months is lots of bad news on climate change, cyclones, storms, forest fires, so many things we have seen which we haven't seen ever in the past. So because of that, because of our next generation, we need to accelerate. And I believe that incremental cars are already coming. Replacements are not much. The replacements have to start happening sooner than later. And large companies, especially ride-sharing companies, have to take a big initiative. And some of them are taking. Individuals who are sensitive, they should start taking initiatives. I feel that you will see momentum building up within next year or two, and that momentum will be very helpful to this transformation.
Thank you, Manoj. A specific question relating to Africa and Europe. Will we ever be able to see electricity from the Sahara region being supplied into the European markets? Perhaps Wale, Richard, or Gavin could attempt that.
Well,
I think
this is,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead. This has been a subject of great interest, Wale. I'm sure you'll have something to say. And indeed, there has been a huge discussion about the use of solar from the Sahara with a subsea cable through to Europe. I think on a more modest scale, though, countries like Morocco have been extraordinarily successful in developing their renewable energy programs, particularly in wind and in solar. And in a sense, what they're doing is exporting energy to Europe. They're doing it in the form of strawberries and raspberries and other crops that have been grown with the assistance of renewable energy in Morocco. But anyway, Wale, I'm sure you have much more to contribute on this.
Well, I just wanted to say, I mean, there are active plans to generate electricity from Africa to Europe. I mean, as you know, Egypt has had phenomenal success in developing its generation capacity to the point where you're now getting to a position of surplus in Egypt, and that surplus has to go somewhere. So there are discussions around building interconnections into Spain and you know, other parts of Europe, and I'm sure those projects will happen. And we've also seen, like Richard said, Morocco has made significant advances. And one of the things that the International Energy Agency is talking about is the plans that European governments have to achieve net zero through developing their hydrogen resources. And to develop hydrogen, you're going to need a phenomenal amount of energy. And you've got all that you know, renewable potential in Africa, solar as well as wind in North Africa. So I think if you go to the EU, you'll probably find that they've figured out they will require energy from North Africa to be able to fulfill those ambitions.
Gavin, I thought I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I completely, Wally's hit the nail on the head, basically. It's not, I don't think it's going to be a cable. I think it's going to be when hydrogen starts to grow, green hydrogen, particularly the resource that exists. Green hydrogen hubs will start to grow where the cheapest renewable energy exists, and that is likely to be North Africa, which has got wind and it's got solar. It's got excellent resources of both. And they will be complementary, and it will be able to pump out green hydrogen at a great rate. And I would be thinking beyond the shores of the EU. I'm sure the EU will be sucking up all the green hydrogen that Africa has. But you know, that's why I think Africa is going to have a step change in its importance in the energy mix, because of the creation and the potential around green hydrogen, as opposed to necessarily sticking a cable under the Mediterranean.
Okay. The next question is also quite interesting. How could we transfer key learnings from the renewable energy implementation success into sectors like water? Again, open to anyone who would like to answer, perhaps Muto-san or Wale or Gavin.
I can somewhat contribute part of the answer there. We have a project under development in Mozambique, which basically involves a fairly significantly sized dam, which is on a river which comes into the area around Beira. And as some of you know, Beira suffered a very severe cyclone last year. And the part of the role of this project will be to do two things. One is to provide protection against flooding, which is an important element in water use, and secondly, to provide a source of potable water for the second largest city in Mozambique. So there are projects around which you can build water projects, and the biggest challenge is how to find financing that will provide potable water to communities at affordable prices. Because many argue, I think quite correctly, that water should be as close to possible and affordable resource for everybody. And so that is going to have to, any water project is going to have to come with subsidies from international organizations, especially in Africa.
Muthu-san.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Richard, for touching upon this very key issue of affordability to pay. And yes, when we think about water as well as scattered mini grids, the issue of affordability, maybe they compete each other for tariff collection, and streamlining that in the local, each community context is very important. And I would like to add that our water colleagues are very alarmed by the scarcity of water that is really manifesting throughout our project locations, especially in Africa. So the source problem is becoming more acute, and there should be a watershed management issue, as well as really, I would say, top-notch technical solutions to bring efficiency and equity in the distribution of water. Thank you.
Okay, we are almost out of time, but I'm tempted to ask this last question. Is microfinancing still relevant in creating and maintaining the momentum in the renewables field? Perhaps Wale, you could react to this, Richard, as well.
Well, microfinancing is very relevant, but obviously it's been, what should I say, upgraded with technology. So where you have mobile payments, you have pay-go systems, you'll find that a lot of the solar home systems are connected to some kind of, payment methods. And also the fact that a lot of the developers find themselves, although they're energy solutions providers, they're having to provide credit as well. So you have to do a credit assessment of your customer. And some of those microfinancing techniques are being used to power communities where you get peer pressure to make sure to encourage people to pay. And a lot of these microfinance banks operate on that principle. So if you take like a container and with solar panels and put it in a community, if one person fails to pay, then you come and take the container away. And that puts a lot of pressure on everybody to pay. And we've seen some developers utilizing those methods. So both are very, they're very interconnected, I must say.
Well, Wale, you have one such developer on your panel today. We have developed something which we have called Solar Electra, which is very simply a solar home system, but for use by small producers, be it a producer of garments, or and in Uganda we have one which actually is installed in a health center on the outskirts of Kampala. And there we are providing electricity for a health center, which over the last 2 months has been able to double its patient volume, because they've been able to have lighting at night and power for a fridge to be able to preserve vaccines over a lengthy period of time. So we see that there are really a lot of opportunities where solar home systems can be rolled out on a really very large basis. But again, this is something that eventually will need the kind of finance that institutions should be attracted to provide.
Thank you. So as we draw to a close, one last final question to all panel members. Learning from our collective experiences, what could be done in the short to medium term to ensure the energy transition materializes and accelerates globally? Why don't you begin, Wale?
Well, the energy transition has already started, and we're seeing it with what's happening with the oil prices. We're seeing it with a lot of the energy produced. We're seeing it with the oil companies who now see that they need to have a renewables business, and the fact that very recently the most valuable energy company in the world is now a renewable energy company in California, as opposed to ExxonMobil. So the energy transition has started, and they obviously will accelerate. But as we've seen, governments may have to step in to provide subsidies from time to time, and we have the likes of the Green Climate Fund and blended finance. The likes of ourselves, in order to be able to demonstrate the track record that these products do work, and to be able to crowd in private sector investment that will then make the sector sustainable. But initially, it will need a bit of a helping hand. But that the process has started, and it's likely to accelerate.
So Rajiv, I'll come in here. I believe that the transition is slow because there are too many stumbling blocks, and I have 4 or 5 suggestions. Number one, on the renewable energy side, I'm seeing capacities coming up as for incremental growth, not for replacement of fossil. Fossil continues. So that actually is a big change which should happen. We are talking of replacement. Now maybe the storage battery cost is still high. Maybe that is a stumbling block, so that we can't have round the clock renewable energy. So that is a factor which I appreciate, but in next year or 2, that will improve. Number 2, similarly on the EV side, I believe it's slow because of charging station. Infrastructure of charging station has to be a public infrastructure. It has to be really budgeted very strongly by each government, because it's a public infrastructure. And every fuel station needs to get it, so that we have fuel, not only fossil stations, we have electric energy charging stations also. Third thing is that, as I said earlier, the retraining process is still not getting investments. Now there are millions of workers working in coal mines, power plants which are thermal power plants, and cars which are IC engine cars. So all those have to be retrained, upskilled, and I think that is a major area of budgeting, which every government, every company which is involved in this industry. And last but not the least, I believe that we can't have banks having NPAs in this process of transition. So very systematic, year by year, quarter by quarter plan of action has to be done in each country. Because if banks have major NPAs, non-performing assets, that will be bad for the economy. So to avoid those NPAs, a very strong, orderly, systematic planning year by year is required in each economy. Now that I think is not happening. It's happening on a very general basis, but not in a precise annual basis. So these are a few suggestions to expedite, because I think today we are slow.
Gavin?
Yeah. So I could mention fossil fuel subsidies. I could mention a carbon price, but I'm going to go over onto capacity and capability again. I think the Paris Agreement is driven by countries. This is a country-led. The world is changing from a top-down multilateral world to a country-led world with the Paris Agreement, and I think we need to help countries build capability to be able to take those decisions themselves. So why don't we create a university of the just transition with the cornerstone investor as the Green Climate Fund? We could set it up in one of the big buildings in Songdo next to you guys to help educate the public officials to be able to take charge and drive that activity in their countries.
Richard?
I think that sounds like a very innovative idea. Seconded.
Muthu-san, the final word.
Thank you very much. I will build on this university idea that was mentioned. Yeah, I think a lot of us were saying that the public sector officials, for example, the regulators, they're overwhelmed and overworked, and let's help them. I've seen some of some of them working with piles of PPA papers, all not electron, all with materials not online, and these are the little bottlenecks that we can together work by helping the officials streamline their works, and everything will follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Muthu-san. We are coming to the end of the session, and I would like to thank you all very much for your interest and participation in this very stimulating discussion. Please note that the video recording of the session will be posted after the event on VOVA and subsequently on the GCF website as well. On behalf of the GCF, I would like to thank Kevin, Wale, Manoj, Muthu-san, Richard, and Gavin for enthusiastically participating in the thought-provoking deliberations. It was truly a pleasure, and we look forward to finding common ground to working with you all in the future. It would be an understatement simply to thank the principal brain behind this conference, Garrett. His energy and enthusiasm went a long way to bring this event to life. Thank you so much, Garrett. I would also like to thank the awesome team that put together this panel, Camille, Thanos, Ayaka, and Saurabh. Also thank the audience for their questions. We would also invite you to join the next session in the agenda, Investing in Nature, which my colleague Veronica is going to be moderating. Stay safe during these turbulent and difficult times, and goodbye. Thank you.